This is AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda, and on AWANI Global this week, we want to take a close look at The Once and Future World Order, a book that's been recently launched looking at the decline of the West and what follows. The author, Dr. Amitav Acharya, proposes after the decline of the West, what follows is the multiplex global order. Looking at increased roles played by other nation states, and also proposing some rather radical or some groundbreaking ideas, such as questioning whether values such as democracy, human rights, and whether they are truly exclusively Western in origin. And I believe to talk about this in great detail, there's no better person than to talk about this. We have Dr. Amitav Acharya joining us live from Washington at this moment. Thank you so much, Dr. Amitav, for joining us. I believe it's very early in the morning there, so thank you. We really appreciate your time. We want to look at the Once and Future World Order, of course. A lot of great reviews so far. We've heard about the book, but can you just tell us a little bit the bigger picture of what this book is trying to propose? Essentially, the main premise is that global civilization will survive the decline of the West. What do you mean by this?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Nailah, for having me on your show. And it's great to be connected to a Malaysian and Southeast Asian audience. About your question, I think the big argument of the book, the one big argument of the book, is that a world order, which is a kind of arrangements, norms, principles, institutions, governance mechanisms to sustain peace and stability and prosperity in the world, is not a monopoly of any civilization or nation or power or region. So world order is not a monopoly, but a shared creation. And now shared creation means many of the ideas and institutions of world order, whether in the past or today, the contemporary world order, were developed in multiple locations around the world. And partly in Europe, but well before Europe, in Asia, in Islamic world, in Africa, in South America, the pre-Columbian South America or North America. And that argument also leads to how these ideas spread. And I argue that some of these ideas are independently invented or developed because human beings, societies try to provide similar solutions to problems of, say, war and conflict, for example. But also sometimes they spread through diffusion, through interactions between civilizations. Now, to illustrate this point or this argument, I go through 5,000 years of history. So this is actually a book about the world order history, 5,000 years, going back to the, say, 3,000 BC, the beginning of the Egyptian and the Sumerian civilizations. And I come all through history to the present. And what I find and what I present in my book is that, again, the institutions and ideas of world order, that independence of states or empire, which has been a big foundation of our world order, and in many ways still is very important to us. Empires still exist. We are all living in the legacy of empires. And also diplomacy, peacemaking, peace treaties, humanitarian values, which includes, but is broader than human rights, and republicanism, kind of a idea of organizing the state, not on the basis of hierarchy or hereditary principle, but on the will of the people. All these things, interdependence, economic interdependence, freedom of seas, where the Indian Ocean and places like Malacca plays a very important role. All these ideas of world order were created in multiple places and at different stages of history, and but they kind of are coming together now. So the current world order is therefore it's a shared creation, not a monopoly. So that is the big argument. Moving on to your other question, the decline of the West will be a good thing. It follows that since the West did not invent these ideas exclusively, it did play its part, but didn't invent them. So these values, these ideas, these institutions will survive, maybe in different form, but fundamentally they will remain. Now, why the decline of the West will be a sort of good thing? I want to be careful about what I mean by good. Good doesn't mean it will lead to kind of a paradise, like a global Eden. I call it a global multiplex, but it's not like a paradise. There will be conflict, there will be cooperation, but it will be a more inclusive, more just world. Why? Because the last 300 years or so of Western dominance has really not been good for the countries that we call as global South. There has been colonialism, racism, and also after World War II, even though formal colonialism ended, although it took some time, but we still have this Western dominance of the West, the United States. And despite some good things that came out of it, it has been generally not, okay, I would say overwhelmingly more beneficial to the West than to the rest. And it has also, while some global South countries, some non-Western countries are getting out of this, countries like China, for example, or India, for example, they are still nowhere near what they were before the rise of the West. They used to be the leading economies of the world, China and India. So I think the decline of the West doesn't mean the end of the West, but the relative dominance or decline of Western dominance, that's what I mean, is actually going to create a more level playing field and open up opportunities for a more inclusive world order, even though it will also have conflict as well as cooperation.
What prompted you to write about this now? Some of the central arguments that you talked about, the idea that these civilizational values, ideas about democracy and human rights, they will continue to exist, but not necessarily dominated by the West. Why is this an important reminder now?
So why I wrote this book? Partly because of my profession as a professor, teaching courses and trying to tell students about world order or international order. And I found that most of the textbooks that are out there are heavily biased. And in fact, I myself did not know most of the things I write about the book. 10 years ago, I did not know that until I started writing and teaching a course and writing about this book. And you are full of there are books by, say, Henry Kissinger on world order, come out in 2014, Neil Ferguson, Civilization, and of course, Samuel Huntington, even more balanced books like William McNeill. All these books were full of this celebration of the superiority of the West. And Francis Fukuyama is another one. So I felt that I cannot just give my students a narrative or a bunch of texts that kind of more or less celebrate the idea that the West is kind of has a monopoly on creating world order, that the current world order is a Western creation, or any arrangement to create peace and stability and prosperity in the world has to be a Western invention. So I decided to write my book. I couldn't find anything that is comprehensive, holistic. I mean, there are books written by individual writers about their own countries and own regions. So you have scholars in China, India, but also in Malaysia. Syed Hussein Alatas is one of the scholars who actually talked about Western dominance and ethnocentrism. So we have Islamic scholars, African scholars, but they're all kind of piecemeal. They don't bring together the picture and over a long period of history. So such a book is not available, especially in the English language, which is a sort of global distribution. So I decided to then spend my time writing this book to create an alternative narrative about world order based on facts, not just opinion. So it took a long time to go through this. And I must say that some of the conclusions of the book that I told you just now about shared creation world order did not come to me in the beginning. I went out to look what's out there, what's common, what's different among civilizations. But as I kept doing research, I was struck by how much of this is actually developed in other parts of the world. And they are similar, but not exactly the same. Sometimes these ideas are developed, like you talk about human rights or republicanism, which is something I talk about instead of democracy, which is a much more narrow term. Now, these ideas may have existed in a very early, or you can say crude, foundational forms, but they did exist nonetheless. And they're like more developed now. And we don't give enough credit, or no credit in many cases, to the creation of these ideas in other parts of the world. I can give you many examples of these humanitarian values coming out of India, the idea of, say, not harming civilians in wartime, or the first peace treaty. The very first peace treaty that we know, we have evidence for, was concluded rather in 1259 BC between Egypt and the Hittite Empire. Well, that's well before anything the West did, or the idea of the West even existed, or even the Greek and Roman civilizations existed. So I also found the freedom of seas, the idea that seas are common to all humankind, and nobody should monopolize sea or trade. Actually was developed in the Indian Ocean with 15th century Malacca playing a very important role, where you had more than 80 communities, different nationalities. It was rules-based. It was there were actually it's a code. You might have heard about this, Undang-Undang Laut Malacca, the Maritime Code of Malacca. This laid out processes for compensation, arbitration, and how to judge prices if there is a dispute, how to do this. Anybody can trade there. You don't have to be a Malay or Javanese or Chinese to trade there. The sea was open. So all these ideas you bring together, I was struck by the fact that how much of these ideas about world order actually came from outside the West. And sometimes they influenced the West, but certainly they were out there. So that actually got me very excited as I found this sort of evidence from Africa, humanitarian values, also trade, the Americas, the Inca civilization, the Maya civilization, the Iroquois in North America. I found that they also had ways of managing peace, managing order, empire, which actually are significantly, which are very similar to what we have elsewhere, despite cultural differences. So that came together, and that's what the book became. Therefore, that the once and future world order, the world order of the past and the world order of the future, and of course the present, are not a Western creation as we've incorrectly, misleadingly attributed to.
You earlier you described this book as sort of an alternative narrative, especially in the field of international relations. There's definitely that gap. But I have to say I was very lucky that when I was studying international relations, I had your books and I had your research, I had your work amongst the Henry Kissingers of the world. So I was very lucky. But going back to what you said about this decline of the Western dominance leading to a more level playing field, and some of your observations that drew to the conclusions that you made in the book, how much of this are you already seeing playing out right now? For example, we're seeing the Western grip on mainstream thought on issues like Israel and Palestine is already faltering, it's falling apart. So do you see some of these things, some of the theories that you make in the book already playing out?
Yes, but it is a bit too early, but let me see how I see the current situation in the world. Of course, I never argue in the book that the decline of the West will lead to perfect stability. No world order is free from conflict. The past world order that we call the liberal international order, which we credit to the United States. It was not really very good for the global South. Some like 98% of major conflicts in the world happened in the global South. Only Europe was saved. That for the Europeans and the United States did not know what it meant to have a major conflict. It was also in terms of economic benefit. Maybe East Asian countries benefited, and later China and India also benefited. But for most part, the global South countries did not benefit from globalization. They were left behind. So no world order is perfectly stable, including our perfectly peaceful. And the last world order, which is passing before our eyes, was not really all that benign to the global South. Now, what is happening now is we see changes. I mean, well, in some ways, Europe, for the first time since the World War II, has a major war, the heart of Europe. And that's what President Trump and President Putin are trying to talk about in Alaska tomorrow. But it's something that is relatively new since the 1945. And we also see that the rise of the global South in not only China or India, but generally global South is doing much better. And it's not necessarily due to the benevolence of the West. The West sometimes has helped, but look, it has to do with also the rulers in the countries in the global South. You can say that those governments, despite their domestic failings, who have adopted wise policies, not wasted their resources, have actually done very well. And I would say that, you will find that examples in Southeast Asia. Now, the agency for creating stability and prosperity in the global South is not Western. It actually belongs to the people and governments. They elect or the government that have ruled these global South nations. So we see kind of a leveling of, or what some people call it, reconvergence, because the global South countries, many of them are great empires in the past. I mean, whether you include China in global South or not, but certainly India, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, the past polities of today's Malaysia. You look at also Islamic world, very good example. They were very prosperous and powerful entities. So in some ways, they are reasserting themselves. And we'll find also examples in South America and Africa. So there is a reconvergence, meaning that the global South is actually catching up after hundreds of years of being left behind, and partly due to colonialism and imperialism. Another thing I see is that the global South is more assertive diplomatically as well. We don't hear about it very much in the media, in the Western media, but a lot of countries in the Middle East, and of course China in East Asia, middle powers like Indonesia, Korea, they have been playing a very important role. Regional institutions like ASEAN, African Union, they are also playing an increasingly important role in regional conflict management, and not always with a great deal of success, but they're nonetheless very important. Without their role, things will be a lot worse. So again, you see another major change where the structure of global cooperation, conflict management is changing. Globalization is changing. It's not going to be driven by the West as for the last few hundred years, but maybe more by the East, including a country like China and India. Globalization is not disappearing. It's just taking a new form or returning to a form that used to be there before the rise of the West, when China and India were the leading economies of the world. So all this I see as changes that ultimately, they're inevitable in some ways. Even if you don't like it, there's not much you can do about it. They're part of the historical shifts in power and wealth. But why not we embrace it? Why we resist it? So the problem with the West is that the West is moving from a very privileged position to a relative decline. The West is not going to disappear. It will remain important. But West is fractured because of the United States policies of Trump, basically, imposing sanctions on its most important allies, or trade tariffs on allies like Canada and the European Union, although less so now, but still, Trump is also threatening to withdraw from NATO or reduce its commitment to NATO unless they do certain things to his liking. So the West as a singular entity, the transatlantic idea of the West, is fractured. So what we see, therefore, a number of shifts that are happening that are actually consistent with what I see the long pattern of global history, where the majority of the countries living outside the West actually played an important role in shaping world order. And I cannot predict the future because nobody can, but I generally think this process of the order shift in the world is inevitable. And the idea that I present is that instead of challenging it, being afraid of it, as many people in the West feel, they think that the end of the American-led world order means the collapse of world order as a whole. And therefore, we should resist it or we should deny it. Instead of doing that, let's embrace it. And there are opportunities one can find in this shift to build a more inclusive, more just world.
We can't predict the future, but the least we can do is to better prepare ourselves for what's to come. So perhaps some final words. What do you think is one lesson that states in Southeast Asia can take away from this, can better prepare for the uncertain future, whether within or beyond the ASEAN framework?
Yes, Southeast Asia is in the crossroads of civilizations. It's actually, in some ways, a microcosm, what I call a multiplex world, multi-civilizational, no single dominant power member in ASEAN, very much connected to the rest of the world through trade, a flow of ideas and connections, connectivity. So Southeast Asia is one of the most appropriate examples here we have about the multiplex world. But at the same time, Southeast Asian countries are also not great powers. There is no great power in Southeast Asia in the traditional sense, despite Indonesia being one of the leading countries and economies in the world. So Southeast Asia's strength lies in unity and cooperation. And that's what ASEAN has provided since 1967. So the most important thing Southeast Asia can do is to keep ASEAN going, keep it alive and well. Now, despite conflicts like what we have in Thailand and Cambodia, in the larger scheme of things, they're not big deals, but still they can undermine ASEAN's unity and credibility. At the same time, while maintaining ASEAN unity, ASEAN should also maintain its what you call ASEAN centrality, playing a convener role in the Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, whatever you call it, and making sure that it doesn't take sides in the great power rivalry, but engages all of them on an equal basis and gives them space to come to Southeast Asia and harness their help and cooperation to Southeast Asia's own benefit. So if Southeast Asia can maintain its unity and the principle of ASEAN centrality in the face of rising great power tensions, I think that will be Southeast Asia's great contribution. I should also say that Southeast Asia is economically very open, but not politically very open. And that's something Southeast Asia should think of doing. I mean, Southeast Asia has all kinds of regimes from total dictatorships to democracies. But I think political openness is also important, especially when you get the will of the people to go with you to play a role in world affairs. So playing a role in global politics, in the multiplex world order, requires also domestic justice, domestic openness, and democracy. So I think Southeast Asia also should pay more attention to what the people want. And this is where it has kind of lagged behind, despite its economic openness and diplomatic dynamism.
We've just got a couple of minutes left. Briefly, while we're on the topic of ASEAN, you talk about the rise of the Global South, the potential in the Global South, and we see blocs like BRICS Plus and ASEAN often framed as sort of an alternative formation to the West. But for the sake of argument, we can also see there's deeply embedded Western political and economic systems or institutions within these member states, or how they operate in the global world, in the global stage. So how do you think these groupings, these alternative formations, can truly be counter-hegemonic to the West?
Yeah, the current world order is still very much kind of dominated by ideas and institutions developed or controlled by the West, if not developed in the West. But I think we see some changes happening. We see new forms of cooperation emerging, and they're happening both at the global level, like the BRICS, but also at the regional level, the regional organizations. And slowly we see a rejection, or at least a moving away from the very exclusively Western dominated ideas and institutions of world order. But it's still going to take a long time, because we're talking about last 300 to 400 years of history. You can say that the turning point would have been the Portuguese arrival in India, or the Portuguese capture of Malacca in 1511. We have a long history of the rising West, dominant West. It's not going to be possible to unravel it overnight. But what we see is, because the vast majority of the people and nations of the world live outside the West, because we have several dynamic nations and emerging powers in what we call the Global South, and whether you include China or not, the Global South is still kind of dynamic and rising. And because we have that, and because of the opportunities that we see have come from, the kind of the fracturing of the idea of a overarching, cohesive, intellectually, racially superior West. And because of all these changes, we do have an opportunity, have a window to create a more open world order, where more actors play a role. And that's what I call a multiplex world.
Yeah, plenty more we'd like to discuss, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have today on AWANI Global. Thank you once again to Dr. Amitav for joining us today.
Thank you very much. And before we go, I want to show you the book, if people haven't seen the American cover.
And I believe it's on sale in stores in KL, so you can go ahead and check it out. Thank you once again to Dr. Amitav for joining us from Washington. That's all the time we have on AWANI Global this week. With me, Nailah. We'll catch you another time.